Some stories begin with a trumpet. Edwin Diaz knows this better than anyone. For 3 years, the walk-in music that accompanied his entrance from the bullpen was not just a song. It was an announcement. A declaration. A sound that told 40,000 people inside Citi Field and millions watching at home that something significant was about to happen and that the man responsible for making it happen had arrived. The trumpet played. The stadium shook. Edwin Diaz closed games. That was the story. Until it wasn't. Until the demotion came. Until the 2 words that no closer who has ever heard his own trumpet walk-in music wants to hear were spoken in a front office meeting that lasted less than 20 minutes and changed everything that followed. Not ready. And what happened after those 2 words is the story that nobody in baseball was prepared for. Because Edwin Diaz did not go quietly to the back of the bullpen. He went looking for someone to blame. And the person he found was Shohei Ohtani. The demotion itself had been building. Not dramatically. Not in the way that roster decisions build when there is obvious, public deterioration in performance. More quietly than that. In the way that organizations make decisions when the numbers tell a story that the eye test hasn't fully confirmed yet but that the front office has decided it can no longer ignore. Diaz had been struggling with command. Not catastrophically. Not in the way that ends careers. But in the specific, dangerous way that affects elite closers who operate with the kind of razor-thin margin for error that comes with throwing in the 9th inning of close games. His fastball was still elite. His slider still had movement that made right-handed hitters look foolish when it was located correctly. When it was located correctly. That was the problem. The locations had been drifting. Slightly. Incrementally. In a way that good hitters were beginning to identify and exploit in the patient, professional manner of lineups that have faced a pitcher enough times to understand his tendencies. The GM made the call. Diaz was out of the closer role. What happened inside the clubhouse in the days that followed is the part of this story that traveled slowly at first and then all at once. The way these things always travel. Through the careful, guarded language of people who were present for something they are not entirely comfortable describing on the record. But the shape of it became clear enough. Diaz was not handling the demotion the way veterans are supposed to handle demotions. Not with the professional acceptance that organizations expect from players who have been in the game long enough to understand that roster decisions are business decisions and business decisions are not personal. He was handling it personally. And the direction of that personal handling had found a target. Shohei Ohtani. The connection required explanation and the explanation, when it emerged, was both logical and deeply uncomfortable. Diaz had been watching Ohtani's season. Everyone had been watching Ohtani's season. But Diaz had been watching it with the specific, sharpening frustration of a man who felt that the attention being paid to one player was attention being subtracted from everyone else. That the organizational resources being directed toward making Ohtani comfortable, making Ohtani healthy, making Ohtani available for the biggest moments, were resources that existed in a finite supply. Resources that might otherwise have been directed toward a struggling closer who needed support. That feeling, which started as frustration and became something less professional over time, had expressed itself in the clubhouse in ways that multiple people who were present described with the same word. Bullying. Not physical. Not the crude, obvious kind that produces immediate intervention. The more sophisticated and therefore more damaging kind. The comments that arrive sideways. The undermining that happens in small moments. The way a veteran with status and history in a clubhouse can make a younger player or a foreign player feel unwelcome without ever doing anything that can be pointed to directly. Ohtani had felt it. The people around Ohtani had seen it. And for a period of time that lasted longer than it should have, it had been allowed to exist in the space that organizations sometimes allow uncomfortable things to exist in when they are hoping the situation resolves itself. It did not resolve itself. The GM's statement came on a Tuesday morning. It was not the statement that had been expected. Front office statements about player demotions are usually careful documents. Calibrated. Designed to communicate the organizational decision while protecting the player's dignity and the organization's relationship with him. This statement was different. Whether by accident or design, whether in a formal press conference or in the kind of candid conversation that gets reported before anyone intended it to be reported, the words that came out of the GM's mouth were not calibrated. He's useless to us right now. 4 words. 4 words that traveled from wherever they were said to every corner of the baseball world in approximately 11 minutes. He's useless to us right now. Not struggling. Not in a transition period. Not being repositioned within the bullpen structure to find a role that better suits his current performance level. Useless. The reaction was immediate and it was not unified. Some people in baseball said the GM had simply said what organizations think but never say. That the translation of roster decisions into diplomatic language is a courtesy that occasionally obscures the reality of how performance is evaluated at the professional level. That Diaz had been performing below the standard required for his role and the GM had described that reality plainly. Others said something different. They said that a player who was already struggling publicly had just been handed a public humiliation by the organization that was supposed to be managing his development. That whatever Diaz had done inside the clubhouse, whatever uncomfortable behavior had been directed toward Ohtani or anyone else, the appropriate response was an internal conversation. Not a word that would follow a pitcher through the remainder of his career. Useless. The word sat in the baseball conversation like something that couldn't be taken back. Because it couldn't. And then came the playoff ban. This was the announcement that moved the story from significant to seismic. Delivered through official channels, framed in the procedural language of roster construction and postseason eligibility, the message was unambiguous. Edwin Diaz would not be on the playoff roster. Not because of injury. Not because of a service time technicality or a contractual complexity. Because the organization had made a determination that his presence in a postseason environment was not compatible with what they were trying to build. Permanently. That word appeared in the initial reporting and was not denied by the organization when reporters sought clarification. A playoff ban. Permanent. For a player who had walked into trumpet music in closed October games and been, not so long ago, one of the most electric relievers in the sport. The trumpet was silent now. Ohtani had said nothing publicly through all of it. Through the demotion. Through the clubhouse behavior that multiple people had described and nobody had officially confirmed. Through the GM statement. Through the playoff ban. He had said nothing. He had shown up. He had played. He had continued to produce at the level that had made him the center of the conversation that Diaz resented in the first place. He had done all of this without a public word about any of it. Until Tuesday night. The press conference after Tuesday's game was supposed to be about the game. It was a good game. The Dodgers had won. Ohtani had contributed. There were legitimate baseball questions to be asked and answered and the assembled reporters had prepared those questions. But someone asked the other question first. Someone near the front of the room, in the direct and slightly uncomfortable way that the best reporters ask the questions that everyone is thinking, asked Ohtani directly about the situation with Diaz. About the reports of clubhouse behavior. About whether he had anything he wanted to say. Ohtani looked at the reporter. He was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to make the room genuinely uncertain about what was coming. Then he said, "I want to be careful here. Because I don't think this conversation helps anyone if it becomes about conflict. That's not what I want." He paused. "But I also think there is a difference between saying nothing and allowing something false to stand. And some things have been said and reported that I think deserve a response." The room went very still. What followed was not an attack. It was not the kind of public retaliation that the dramatic framing of the situation might have suggested. Ohtani is not built for that. His public communication has always been characterized by precision and restraint and a fundamental unwillingness to perform emotion for an audience. What he said was quieter and more devastating than an attack would have been. He said, "I came to this organization to win. Not to be the center of attention. Not to take anything from anyone. I have never asked for special treatment and I have never received it. What I have received is the support of teammates who understand what we are trying to do together." He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked back up. He said, "When someone struggles, the people around them have a choice. They can add to the difficulty or they can help carry it. I know which choice I have tried to make every time a teammate has struggled. I know which choice was made in my direction. I will let people draw their own conclusions from that." The room was completely silent. He said one more thing before the press conference moved on. He said, "The report from the organization speaks for itself. I didn't ask for any of it. I didn't want any of it. I just wanted to play baseball." Dave Roberts spoke last. His voice had the particular weight of a manager who had watched something unfold inside his clubhouse that he wished had unfolded differently and was now standing in front of cameras accounting for it. He said, "What Shohei said tonight is who he is." He didn't have to say anything. He chose to say something because he felt something false was being allowed to stand. That took more character than most people in that situation would have shown. He stopped. Then he said, "We are moving forward. The people who are committed to what we are building here know who they are. And the people in that category are the people who will be here in October. Some stories begin with a trumpet. This one ends in silence. The silence of a bullpen that no longer announces its arrivals with music. The silence of a front office that said useless out loud and cannot unsay it. The silence of a playoff roster that will not include the name it once celebrated. And underneath all of that silence, one voice. Quiet. Precise. Refusing to perform anger it genuinely doesn't feel. Shohei Ohtani. Who came here to win. Who never asked for the story to be about him. And who, on a Tuesday night in front of cameras he didn't ask for, told the truth in the way that only people with nothing to hide can tell it. Simply. Completely. Without a trumpet.